These horrifying images from Jerusalem that you have just seen are not often seen on television networks in different parts of the world. This time they were, because the revenge killing of an innocent Palestinian boy, Abu Khader, by 3 ultra-Zionists shocked the world. And it shocked many in the United States and in Israel as well. The father of the dead boy was angry when he spoke, saying, "These people are like Nazis, like those from Germany. How did the Jews burn my boy? This is the new Nazis." Now, one can forgive him for speaking in anger, but if you think about it seriously, the slogans that were being chanted in the footage you've seen, the 2 central slogans were, "Kill the Arabs, kill the leftists." The 2 slogans that used to be shouted by the Hitler Youth and Hitler's supporters on the streets of Germany before they came to power was "Kill the Jews, burn their shops, kill the communists." The interesting thing about this is that when they're chanting "kill the leftists," they're not talking about communists in the traditional sense. They're effectively speaking about those in Israeli society itself who challenge this behavior and who want peace, a genuine peace with the Palestinians. So it's a 2-pronged attack. Kill the Arabs is an attack on the Palestinians, wipe them out, if necessary, exterminate them, get rid of them, expel them. And kill the leftists is an attack on those in Israeli society, a minority, who denounce this behavior. But the minority is growing. Even Tzipi Livni, not someone on the left by any stretch of the imagination, tweeted after the murders of Abu Khader, "The murderers must be found and tried immediately. Nothing must stop us. This is the difference between the state of Israel and a terror organization. We must punish those who want to turn us into a society of killers. This cannot be allowed to happen in Israel." Pretty strong response from someone who's been minister of governments, someone on the Israeli right, who is now getting worried by the far right in her own country. But of course, there are no easy solutions. The editorial in Haaretz, the liberal paper in Israel on 9th of July 2014, was even stronger than before. Abu Khader's murderers are not Jewish extremists. They are the descendants and builders of a culture of hate and vengeance that is nurtured and fertilized by the guides of the Jewish state. Those for whom every Arab is a bitter enemy simply because they are Arab. Those who were silent at the Beitar Jerusalem games when the team's fans shouted "Death to Arabs" at Arab players. Those who call for cleansing the state of its Arab minority, or at least to drive them out of the homes and cities of the Jews. Prosecuting the murderers is no longer sufficient. There must be a cultural revolution in Israel. Its political leaders and military officers must recognize this injustice and right it. They must begin raising the next generation, at least, on humanist values and foster a tolerant public discourse. Without these, the Jewish tribe will not be worthy of its own state. Now, these are strong remarks from Israelis who have never gone so far before in denouncing the murder of a Palestinian. But let's be clear, these murders in different shapes, in different forms, have been taking place since 1948, when the Israeli state was founded. So when Haaretz says that these Jewish extremists, which it has in inverted commas, are not the only ones responsible, they're right. The question is, how far are they prepared to go to change conditions in Israel, to bring about a genuine transformation which will allow Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, Muslim Arabs, Christian Arabs, and the Jewish population of that country to live in peace. Now, often what happens is that incidents like this, which are genuinely horrific, and by the way, I mean both incidents, the targeting of 3 settler kids, Jewish settler kids, by a group of people whose connection with Hamas has not yet been proved. Certainly the Hamas leadership was not aware of this action being carried out. It's murky, the whole episode. But that killing is equally horrific, in my opinion. I don't condone it or defend it. There's no justification for behavior of this sort. But the revenge killing was just open. Catch any Arab and kill him. That is what they did. They tortured him, they burnt him, and they left his parents weeping. And this incident, for the first time, created real anger in the United States on the part of sections of the media. And the debate is now slowly beginning to take on a different hue. But America's rulers, although they condemned the killing, did so in muted tones. Samantha Power, the United States representative at the United Nations, Susan Rice, the Secretary of State, who had responded in a very, very clear and emotional way when the 3 Jewish kids were killed, were much more muted in their response. But one thing has changed. Palestinians used to be killed anonymously. Their names were never reported in the Western media. This time, the name of the kid who was killed and a cousin of his who was tortured, beaten up, and arrested, locked up by the Israeli police, American Palestinian citizen, and then they had to release him temporarily. Their names are being mentioned. That's a small step forward in the West by the media to recognize that the Palestinians have names. They're not people without an identity. Their identity is known to themselves, to their friends, to their colleagues, to their families. It is never allowed to be known in the West, because in the West, the general impression that has been created now, certainly for the last few decades, is that Palestinian is synonymous with terrorist. And once this sort of propaganda gets going, it is very difficult to get anywhere. So what has happened in July 2014 has once again ignited a debate. And it's an interesting moment in Palestinian history, because regardless of the fact that both leaderships of the Palestinian movement, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, led by the late Yasser Arafat and his unworthy successors, and the Hamas leaders have basically been able to offer nothing to their people. That has been one of the problems. And with this episode taking place in East Jerusalem, the Palestinians are on the move again. They're not going to be disappeared easily. They will fight back, and they will defend themselves against any and all outrages that take place. It's a defining moment that there is a new wave now within the Palestinian population saying, we're not going to take this anymore. And this is going to pose problems for an Israeli leadership which has been adamant and obstinate. Even as I'm recording this program, Israeli planes are bombing Gaza yet again. People are being killed. The threat is that there might even be a boot invasion. Israeli soldiers will go in, which will be crazy, because all this continues the cycle of violence and the cycle of suffering that has been inflicted on the Palestinians since the Israeli state was formed in 1948. You know, we live in times when history is usually vilified as a discipline. People talk about the present And they often forget that the present has a past. And without understanding the past, it is impossible to explain the present. Almost on every level, even the most trivial things that take place. There is a past, they have a history, there is a memory. And in the West today in particular, this memory is forgotten, it's ignored, because if the citizens found out that this has been going on since 1948, they might ask more questions. So it's an incident that has taken place, they hope it will be forgotten. I'm not so sure that it's going to be forgotten this time, because we are now reaching a climax in the relationship between the Israelis and their Western backers and the Palestinian population, with hardly any backers at all in the world, either Western or Arab. So how did it start? It started very simply when the British created a settler state for the Jewish population in Europe on the land that belonged to the Palestinians. The founding myth of the Israeli state, which was repeated time and time again, was a land without a people for a people without a land. The implication was that there were no people in Palestine when the first settlers arrived from Europe, which was long before the Nazis came to power in Germany. Of course, the Judeo side of the Second World War gave an enormous impetus to the consolidation and official foundation of Israel as a state. There were two ways they could have done it, of course. One way was to live with the local population, have a cultural presence, as many Jewish philosophers argued. The second way was to create a militarized state and expel and kill, and in some cases rape, Palestinians. All this has now been acknowledged by Israel's historians, even some of the more intelligent ones. Staunch Zionists like Benny Morris have said this is what we did and we had to do it to build a country. Initially, he said in one interview, well, so what if we did it? After all, people going, the Puritans who went to the United States from England to create the United States of America exterminated all the native population, as if one crime justifies another. Then under heavy pressure from the United States, Jewish people in the United States, he dropped that line of argument because it's unacceptable in the United States today. But that was the mentality. We're a superior race, we're a superior religion, we are the chosen people, and we can do basically what we want to these wretched Arabs. And effectively that is what they began to do, initially on their own with some backing from Britain and France, and ultimately with the backing of the United States of America. So that is when the problem began, with the large-scale expulsions of Palestinians from villages whose names were wiped out and forgotten. There were massacres, famous massacres in Deir Yassin, which is still commemorated today, but many lesser massacres which aren't talked about. And it became increasingly difficult to talk about these because constantly from the late 60s onwards, you were reminded of the Judeo side. Now, no one in their right mind in Palestine or anywhere else defends the Judeo side or what happened. But this was a European crime committed against the Jews of Europe. It was not a crime committed by Arabs. The Palestinians, in a strange way, have become the indirect victims of the genocide against the Jews. Because the Jews suffered and were exterminated, between 5 and 6 million of them. But what they did in Palestine was to victimize those who were not responsible for the crime at all. And these injustices, of course, pervade Palestine. Everyone knows their history. They know where they lived. They know where their village was. They know who expelled them. They know how many people died. They know which of their women were raped. They know and they remember. And this is what the West effectively has failed to understand that it is going to be extremely difficult to wipe out the memory of the past from the Palestinians because they are still living that tragedy. Refugees living in ghettos, expelled from one country, finding refuge in another. What is Gaza? The strip of Gaza which is being bombed numerous times, where people have been killed endlessly, where young boys especially, the figures are horrific, that have been targeted over the last 25 years, deliberate targeting and killing of young Palestinian males. But who are these Palestinians in Gaza? Gaza used to be a tiny village. Why is it so huge? Currently, it's got a population of 1.8 million. The American academic Juan Cole has supplied on his blog site all the figures which make distressing reading, but which are absolutely accurate. The number of Palestinians in Gaza, he tells us, whose families were expelled as refugees from their homes in what is now southern Israel. Want to know the number? 1.2 million. Number of Palestinians in Gaza still living in the 8 recognized refugee camps, which have one of the highest population densities in the world, over 500,000. Compensation Palestinians of Gaza have received for the billions of dollars of property taken from them by Israelis in Beersheba, Sderot, etc., 0. Years since Israel allowed Palestinians of Gaza to export what they produce, 7. Unemployment in Gaza as a result of the Israeli blockade on civilians, 38.5%. Estimated unemployment rate in the United States during the Great Depression, 25%. Percentage of children in Gaza suffering from acute malnutrition, 13.2%. Rate of anemia in Palestinian children in Gaza, 18.9%. Percentage of water in Gaza that is potable, 10%. Years, according to the United Nations, before Gaza becomes uninhabitable, 6. Number of airports in Gaza rendered inoperable by Israeli airstrikes, 1. Number of airports working in Gaza, 0. Number of ports allowed by Israelis to operate on Gaza's Mediterranean coast, 0. What to do? This is the reality. And this is the reality that Palestinians in Gaza confront. I don't talk about Palestinians in other parts of the occupied West Bank, where they are permanently watched by Israeli tanks, overlooked by Israeli settlers from illegal settlements that they weren't allowed to build, but that they built. And when you compare how the West, and when I say the West, I primarily mean the United States and its European allies, deals with anyone they don't like, bombings, occupations, large arrests, and then compare how they deal with the Israelis, they effectively accept all this. And what has been happening over the last 30 years? The Palestinian leadership demanded an independent Palestine. They didn't even go back to what the UN had agreed in 1948. They were prepared to accept the West Bank without the settlements and Gaza. This is what was agreed at Oslo. The late Edward Said, great Palestinian intellectual and friend, said that the Oslo Accords were the Palestinian Versailles, that what was done after the First World War to the enemy states was now being done, and that the Palestinian leaders were acquiescing in their own destruction. He was denounced for that. No one accepted what he said. But as the years went by, it became clear that the Israeli government was using the Oslo Accords to further isolate the Palestinians, and that the Palestinian leadership, the PLO in particular, had decided to give up all effective opposition to the Israeli state. In reality, the Palestinian Liberation Organization had become a tool of the Israeli state. They couldn't function without it. They accepted its orders, hoping that at the end they might have a small bit of territory that they could call their own. But that hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. So the idea that there could be two states, a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, this idea has been destroyed not by the Palestinians but by the Israelis, because by extending the settlements without permission, sometimes even with strong opposition among sections of Israelis, the settlers, backed by their governments, have just carried on and on and on. And what is the result? The result is that a two-state solution, in my opinion, is now impossible. The wall that the Israelis have built, designed to prevent traffic between Palestinians on either sides of it, is ultimately useless. It's not going to work. It's a security wall. It's designed to humiliate Palestinians even further. There are stories and images of people queuing up before they can cross from one side of Palestine to another. There are stories of Israeli soldiers, revealed by Israeli soldiers themselves, who say, we were dehumanized when we were sent to function as guardians of the border. Many soldiers in Israel have spoken up very, very freely. And some Air Force pilots, Israeli Air Force pilots, said, we are not going to bomb anything outside Israel. We will defend our country, but we will not be part of bombing raids on occupied lands. And 6 or 7 of them, very courageous people, several years ago, resigned in protest. So it's not that there isn't any opposition in Israel, but this opposition is being totally deluged by the other side, by Netanyahu's government, by the extreme right, people even on his right, many of them refugees from Russia who escaped from Russia claiming to be Jews. How many of them are Jews is still disputed, by the way. So Israeli society is deeply fractured at the moment. And this is where the question of what is to be done comes up. What are we to do? The argument often used in the West is that if the Palestinians give up their violence, if they totally make a commitment that they will not use violence against Israel, if they recognize Israel, things will improve. Well, the Palestinian Liberation Organization did that. Arafat went and humbled himself before the Israelis and the Americans. What happened? Nothing happened. Nothing was changed. Effectively, the condition of the Palestinian became worse. Now, instead of being bossed around by Israelis, they were bossed around by the Palestinian Security Police, which took its orders from Mossad. This is where despair in that region began to grow at an enormous pace. And this is where despair, it was thought, would just lead to total apathy. But that is not the case, as recent events have shown. Apathy is not an option for most Palestinian citizens, because they feel that anything would be better than this, what they're going through now. So what is the solution? Is there a solution? In my opinion, the only serious solution in Israel-Palestine today is that of a single state. in which all citizens, Jews, Muslims, Christians, different sects within the region, have equal rights before the law. At the moment, Arabs are treated as second-class citizens. But you can't build a unified state on that. What are the arguments against? The arguments against are that it will no longer be the Israel they know and love. But the Israel they know and love is effectively created as an ethnic Jewish state. Why should intelligent Jews who know the history of the Jewish people find that acceptable? The result of this state had been a disaster. The way it was created, the way it was used as a battering ram by the West, first by the British in 1956 to attack and try and destroy Arab nationalism, ultimately in 1967, it hasn't solved the problem. So the only way is a single state. This is why the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is so important. It's the first serious attempt by Palestinians to say no more violence. It's going to be a long campaign with the help of the world to isolate the Israelis till they accept a single-state solution. And this is now creating real problems. The sanctions can't take place because no Western state is prepared to sanction Israel. But boycotts are being successful, companies divesting is happening, the Israelis are nervous, so they're waging a huge campaign against BDS. And the Palestinians say, when we use force, they attack us. When we try and build a peaceful movement, a pacifist movement, they attack us, calling us anti-Semites. What can we do? The Israelis would like them to do nothing. But the Palestinians can't accept that solution. They are not going to be disappeared from history. So sooner or later, by the middle or perhaps the end of the century, they will have to live together. And I think there will probably be changes within Israeli society. And one of these days, perhaps there will be elected leaders in the West and North America who will say, enough is enough, we can't carry on like this. We can't permit this to go on. And the very great Hebrew poet, Aharon Shabtai, wrote a poem in 2002, which I would like to read to you. He is warning his countrymen that if they carry on like this, their future will be in an international criminal court. They will be tried for war crimes. And he wrote this with real emotion and angry at what his country was doing. The dumpy little man with the scourge in his hand, in his free time, runs his fingers over the keys of a baby grand. But we've seen it all before, and so, from the primitive East, we return to the West. He'll help solve the economy's problems. The unemployed will man the tanks or dig graves. And come evening, we listen to Schubert and Mozart. Oh, my country, with each sandal, with each thread of my khaki pants, I've loved you. I could compose psalms to a salad of white cheese and scallions. But now, who will I meet when I go out for dinner? Gramsci's jailers? What clamor will rise up through the window facing the street? And when it's all over, my dear, dear reader, on which benches will we have to sit, those of us who shouted, "Death to the Arabs," and those who claimed they didn't know?